My number 10 is a movie that we talked about early on in 2020, and I wanted to make sure to give it a shout out because I really did enjoy it quite a bit. And it's different than any other of my films on my list because it isn't a super dramatic type of film, and that is the half of it. The half of it is on my number 10. At number 10, I really, really enjoyed this film. It is directed by Alex Wu. Really a remarkable story, a love triangle kind of story, but it really is so well done and so unique and interesting between these two girls who are falling in love and they don't even know that they're falling in love, and the quirky, awkward, overly smart high school girl in this film that is falling in love with the immigrant, kind of out of place Christian girl who is in the town. I really enjoyed the story. I think it's super relevant. I think it's so different and unique. And really, really well written. I just enjoyed this film, and I think it's time to give a shot to these type of Netflix films that are a little bit lovey-dovey, but so well done. Not like the other Netflix films that are a little bit too over the top. This
Not
one
to
felt
like
rounded
all
enough.
the boys, not to all the
Yeah,
boys.
I didn't want to name any RB3, but sure. No, I'm kidding. But yes, not at the same level as like a super over the top kind of teenage romance film, but a little bit more grounded teenage romance film with plenty of comedy as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot to offer in that film, and I think it does stand out, and it's so unique and special because it's not something that we typically see. We don't typically see that average teenage, like, romance type of coming of age movie centered around burgeoning sexuality and a girl coming into her own sexuality and understanding all of that. So that's a really special one.
Yeah, I also really like the connection between both of them being immigrants and being people who are from different cultures and different backgrounds in an all white community. I thought that was really unique too, and something that was kind of dabbled, like touched upon and not necessarily focused on, but it still was there and it felt very clear and resonant. So I really enjoyed that as well. My number 9 is The Assistant. It's a small independent film directed by Kitty Green is her name, and she directed this film starring Julia Gardner. It is about an assistant to an executive in a production company, funny enough. And I can't lie, part of this movie is a little bit towards my interest and my bias, just because I did work for a production company for quite a few years. So I did know these typical female assistants who were working for top executives and also in a production company making films and movies that are supposed to represent, you know, women of all backgrounds and, you know, power to women and feminist and all this jazz, where the top dog, the executive, is the most sexist, misogynistic piece of crap there is. And that was so true, and it was true in my production company, and it's true in this film, and it's true in a lot of production companies where you see the power dynamic that is abused inside the Hollywood system, inside the movie production system, where powerful people basically choose who they want to cast if you suck up to them, or if you, even worse, just, you know, sleep with them or go to bed with them, or do favors for them. And it gets darker and darker, but that really is the case in a lot of the history of Hollywood. And obviously we get into the Weinstein thing, where that's kind of the Weinstein way of what it was in the past, and now us trying to get away from that now. And The Assistant kind of shows a spotlight to that in a very quiet, subtle, kind of far back kind of way. It's not necessarily in your face and tossing it in your face. It's much more quiet and subtle in the way that Julia Garner discovers, like, the person she's working for in this company she's working for is actually pretty vile and pretty dark, even though she really wants to be a director and a producer in a film industry. So I think it's a very important film, and I really enjoyed what it represented. So
Yeah, I think the standout of that is for sure Julia Garner's performance. I thought she was absolutely incredible. I thought the film was definitely super important, and this is a story that's really impactful, and it shows it in a subtle way, which keeps it something interesting, and also just keeps it so realistic because we're following her as she's talking about, like, yeah, I worked so hard to get this type of job, I'm trying to work forward in this career, and she's kind of seeing like this is how the industry is and this is what you're going forward. And she's one of those people that's trying to do something even with her small position that she has to change that, to actually discuss it and talk about it, and is quickly shut down. So yeah, it's definitely a very, very slow and quiet film, but overall the message that it has is something that's super important.
My number eight is an animated movie, and it had to be in here, guys. I had to do it. It's Soul. Soul is my number eight. I love this movie. I think the score is absolutely incredible. It's a Golden Globe nominated score now. It'll probably be Oscar nominated. Really, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are truly one of the best composers right now, and I think they should get the kind of love that they're currently getting. And Soul's just a really well done Pixar film, a classic, personal story about this guy who's trying to figure out what his life is and what he needs to do. And it's this midlife crisis that he's dealing with as he is literally in the other side by dying or by almost dying, and meeting someone whose consciousness hasn't entered their body yet, and trying to decide whether they want to be born or not be born and what that decision is. Really interesting film, really well done, really emotional film. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So it's my number eight.
Yeah. Well, I'll be talking about it much later.
Oh, okay.
Later on
Okay.
in my list, but
That's actually, I'm super upset. That's one of the ones that didn't make my list, but it is all the way up there, number one in my honorable mentions. Oh my gosh, just everything about this. I felt so much. I felt so inspired and uplifted after this, and I do love the way they portray everything, the way they portray this other like realm. I truly do feel like this was one of the standout films of the year, and it definitely deserves all the accolades that it will 100% be for sure getting this award season. Yeah.
My number seven is a movie that I loved the first half of the year, and it honestly was in my top five in the first half of the year. I think we did a half of the year movie list, and this was on there, and it is Bad Education on HBO. This is a movie starring Hugh Jackman. It is so freaking wild. This movie is one of the most like twisty turny movie I've seen in a minute. Like, you don't necessarily know who the protagonist is, or if the protagonist is supposed to be a redemption story or like a negative story, or who you're rooting for half the time. And you start to realize like this lead character, this character that Hugh Jackman is playing, no matter how good his intentions may be, just the greed that starts to eat away at him so much that he thinks he's doing the right thing when he clearly isn't. And the student who he inspired to defy him just goes in and defies him, and he's like, wait a minute, you can't do that. And she's like, you told me I could. It's so cool. It's such an interesting story. It's so intense and interesting. Again, the turns that this movie takes is wild. I highly recommend it. It's so weird to see a movie that's a purely streaming film before the streaming films kind of took over on Warner Brothers and
yeah.
HBO, right? It's like it didn't come to theaters. It was only on streaming. And yet now it's getting some love now because of all these movies that are now coming up on streaming. But yeah, Bad Education is my number seven. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, you go. You go, Speed.
I really enjoyed it when we checked it out. It's actually one of the ones that it was so early on in this year or last year that I feel like it was just one of those that kind of fell off. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So I love that it's on your list.
Yeah, that's definitely one. I literally it's one of those ones that I always forget about, but then whenever I see somebody mention it, I'm like, oh yeah, I did really like that one.
yeah.
And I've been seeing that a lot. I've been seeing a lot of like film Twitter and film Instagram giving this some shout outs, and I really dig that. It's an honorable mention for me too, though. So
My number six is a fun one because I don't think you guys have checked this out, because I don't think anyone has checked this out. I got to see this movie with a screener because it's a movie that I actually reviewed for Geeks of Color. So if you guys want to check out my review, it's up there. So I saw it a couple weeks early. It's called Synchronic. It's by a director called Justin Benson, starring Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan. it's a interesting, weird, super low budget sci-fi film that I was not on board with the first half of the film. I was like, what is this film? It doesn't make any sense, and it's kind of slow. And then it starts to pick up once they deliver a twist in the middle of the film around Anthony Mackie's character, and we start to discover this new sci-fi angle to it that he discovers along with his character. And the way he uses his new sci-fi power is really refreshing, unique, cool, heartwarming. It's a very heartwarming film where you start to learn. It's like Soul, where you start to learn the meaning of life and what life means and what's the purpose of like beginning and end and all this huge that really get jumped in here. And it's so well done. I really enjoyed this movie, and it's definitely in my top 10 of the year, in my top 6 of the year. So, Synchronic. I highly
Wow.
recommend it.
Wow, I saw it on Twitter. I've seen a few people kind of talking about it. I
Yeah,
am so surprised to hear it this high up. I'm definitely gonna have to check it out.
it's great. It really is.
Yeah, I haven't heard of this. I haven't heard of this at all. So
Yeah.
I really,
Geeksthecolor.com. No, I'm kidding.
hey,
I
My
did
see,
not
review's up
expect
there.
that.
making the
I did not
description.
expect that.
There you go. There you go. I really loved it, and I really think it's one of those movies that by the third act you start to be like, "Damn, this is deep," and this is really like heartwarming. It makes you feel like, man, humanity, we can do it. Maybe it's that kind of movie, and I really have to give a lot of credit to Justin Benson, and Aaron Moorhead, who directed the film as well. My number five, guys, is a movie that you guys have mentioned before, and I'm sure RB3 might mention a little bit later on. I'll quickly touch on why I loved Mangrove the most out of the Small Axe series. It definitely is the most feature film. It's the longest one in the entire series, I believe. Feature film length with about a buck 45, I think, is how long the movie runs, or about 2 hours, I think, is how long the movie runs. Really well directed, really well paced, a lot of story in there, a lot of character, incredible performances, a lot of nuance, a beautifully well told story that Steve McQueen just nails absolutely down. Really one of my favorite films of the year, and it was so refreshing to see the culture that the characters bring to the UK and how they take that with them and how they're opening up these restaurants and these places and these sections in the community that speak to them, and yet how they face off against these racist cops is heartbreaking, but at the same time uplifting by the end when they're staring them straight in the eye at the core and just outsmarting them completely. It really is really cool to see. So Mangrove is my number five.
Yeah, Mangrove is absolutely stellar. Probably if I had to pick my favorite one out of all of those, it would be that one.
Yeah.
I just think like from all the performances, Steve McQueen absolutely nails it from the cinematography and the direction. He just has a grasp on this film for a courtroom like drama type of film. It's just far superior than what I've seen a lot just over the past few years. This is something that needs to be on everybody's radar.
My number four is on my list. I'm looking at my list. Okay, cool. This is how I did it because my top five can basically be jumbled up. It could be my number one or my number two, but I decided to put probably the most personal one in my number four spot, which is Minari. You already brought it up, RB3, but Minari obviously is a very beautiful film, but it's a very, 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 very personal film to me because it's so similar to the way I was raised, like so similar. The way that my dad came into this country and worked his way up and worked his way in a community where there was a lot of Latino people working in the same community, like there is a lot of Korean people in this film, and there is a lot of white people in that community too. And it's this kind of dynamic of like what it is to be an American, how to speak American, all this kind of stuff that I learned as a kid. And I felt like that little kid in that film, that 8-year-old kid when I was 8 years old. Living in this community where my mom was very much like raising me the traditional Colombian way, and keeping the tradition of Spanish only and all this kind of stuff, kind of like the Korean grandmother. So I felt very spoken to in this film, and it's a very personal film, very well done, very well directed, and it shows you kind of what immigration is. And I feel like a lot of people need to see that nowadays, even if it's Korean immigration, Middle Eastern, Mexican, whatever it is, it really shows you 90% of the stories are like this and not like anything else you hear. So really love Minari for sure. And my number three is a film that I think is going to be high for you, Sabrina. So I'll let you obviously take a little bit more of it. But it's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is my number three. A movie by Eliza Hittman, a filmmaker who really delivered an incredible film with the performances that she got, with the story that she got, the quietness of the film, the power of the film that it holds, even though it is quiet, is really remarkable. The way that the film is shot is so uh, just grounded and real. It also has that kind of docu vibe, not necessarily maybe to the level of Nomadland, but it does have a similar kind of like these seem to be real girls kind of vibe, which is so cool and so down to earth and so interesting to see on film because of the story that they're telling and to see all the loopholes and all the ways you have to kind of go around it. And finally, when we get to that ultimate scene, Sabrina, that you've talked about, where we see everything she's been through, and she kind of speaks it out when she says "never, rarely, sometimes, always," and she's almost always saying "always" or sometimes, and we start to see that sometimes the perception that people have in their minds, especially a lot of Americans, I really want to include and say a lot of Americans think a certain way about this whole issue. And the way that she breaks it down is very personal, and it makes you re-question all those things that you had, or makes them re-question all the things that they had in their head as far as perception goes. So that is my number three film of 2020. My number two, I can't believe I'm getting to my number two. My number two is The Vast of Night, RB3, which was your number nine, I believe?
Yeah, that was my number 10. That was my number 10.
Number 10. Like,
Yeah,
damn, bro, that's way
wow.
too damn low, man.
Wow.
But no, really, I really love this movie. The script is just so filled with so much, and yet you're in it for all that time because the way the camera just brings you into the story is just so undeniable, and you cannot reject what is being told to you because the camera is telling you to focus, which I think is incredible because of the energy the camera brings, the excitement, the movement, the super speed, crazy go-kart oneer that they do, which is incredible when you go pretty much all across the town and through houses. I love that scene because it really shows you the tidiness of the town, but at the same time, the coolness of the camera work, which is so cool. And obviously the story itself that is really sci-fi, but at the same time, really horrific and scary and interesting and of its time. I really enjoyed this movie so much. So shout out to the cast and crew of The Vast of Night. My number one is one that I had to debate a lot. What was my number one? Because I really did want to pick one that represented what I thought a film of 2020. But at the same time, I had to be honest with myself, right? As far as like what resonated with me the most. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, what movie really kicked me in the butt and kicked me in the gut the most? And if I'm being honest, guys, it's One Night in Miami. One Night in Miami is my number one film of the year, directed by Regina King, who absolutely murders it. But the idea of the film, and I know it's about four African American icons of Malcolm X, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and Sam Cooke, who really defied their generation and defined just the entirety of what they can do and what talent can do, and what the mind behind the talent can be. There's so much there that resonated with me personally, mainly because of the idea of what you can do for your people. And I've always talked about this. I've talked about this with you, Sabrina, off camera, but the idea of me representing my culture, my people, my struggles, everything they've been through, generations, hundreds of generations behind me. What can I do to impact them? And what can I do to honor them and to uplift my people? And I really love that aspect of the movie, telling you, what are you doing with your talents? What do you have in front of you that you dominate, that you absolutely destroy, whether it's sports, athletics, or music? If you can use that to amplify a bigger voice and amplify it in a bigger way, more than economic, more than politically, just inspirationally, just defy your own people, and the way that Malcolm X inspires, even though it might be fictional, probably is fictional, inspires Sam Cooke to write A Change Is Coming. That to me was so cool because it talks about, look at your talent, man. You're making all this money for all these people, and it really is cool, but you could be so much better. You can make songs that like destroy people's souls, and he does with that song. And I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And it's one of those things that kind of tells you what you can do is so much more than what you can even imagine. And I just love that idea of really taking this weight that is on your shoulders and just being like, you know what, I'm oppressed this weight. I'm straight up going to lift it, and I'm not going to shy away from it. So I love One Night in Miami, and I really think it delivers. So.